I was born in the shadow of the river, the Nile, our lifeblood. My father was a fisherman, my mother a potter, and the world felt eternal in those days. The reeds swayed in the warm wind, and the sun painted gold across the water. But even then, I could hear the distant drums, the whispers of war carried by merchants from the south. I was 17 when the soldiers came to our village. They wore linen armor and carried bronze-tipped spears. Their faces were hardened by the desert sun, but their eyes held pride. When the captain asked for volunteers, my hand rose before I could think. Perhaps it was foolish youth, or perhaps I believed the stories of glory they told. That night, I kissed my mother's hands. She said nothing, only pressed a small clay amulet into my palm, the Eye of Horus, for protection. I didn't believe in omens then, but I kept it, anyway. We marched for days through the heat. The sand burned our feet, and the air shimmered like glass. I learned quickly that glory tastes like dust and sweat. Our army was small, a band of farmers, fishermen, and brickmakers, led by men who knew war like others knew harvest. The enemy were Nubians, fierce and proud, guarding their borders to the south. We were told they had raided our gold mines near the first cataract. We were told they were savages. But as I would soon learn, every enemy is only a mirror we refuse to face. At night, by the flickering firelight, I wrote on scraps of bark notes I would never send home. The captain said we marched for the glory of Egypt. I began to wonder if we marched only for survival. We reached the border at dawn. The Nubians were already waiting, painted in red ochre, their shields made of cowhide, their spears glinting like fire. The sound came first, a deep hum of war drums that rolled through the valley like thunder. Our captain raised his hand, and the archers drew. The air turned black with arrows. I still remember the moment my spear struck the first man. He looked my age, maybe younger. He fell silently, dust rising around him. That's when I learned the first truth of war. Victory is never as loud as death. When the battle ended, I was still standing. Half our men were not. The captain said we had won. But as I looked at the field, bodies scattered like broken statues, I wondered, who had truly lost? We buried our dead under the open sky. There were no tombs, no carvings, only sand and silence. That night, I couldn't sleep. The faces of the fallen haunted me, not only ours, but theirs. In the flicker of the campfire, I thought I saw one of them move, his eyes open in the dark. I walked closer, only to find my own reflection staring back from a puddle of blood and water. The captain found me there. He said, "A soldier's heart must be made of stone." But mine was still flesh, beating, breaking, remembering. I wasn't fighting for Egypt anymore. I was fighting not to lose myself. We were ordered to return north. The mines were reclaimed, the border secured, the pharaoh would be pleased. But the desert takes more than it gives. Many men fell to thirst, some to fever, some simply walked into the dunes and never came back. I carried the wounded when I could. The amulet my mother gave me had cracked, but I still held it close. Each night I whispered to the Nile, though we were far from her waters, greater than, I will come home. But I didn't yet know that home was no longer the same. The march back felt longer than the march to war. Our feet sank deep into the sand, and the sun mocked us from above. When water ran out, men drank from their helmets. When strength failed, we carried each other, or left the fallen for the wind to bury. The drums of war had faded, replaced by the buzzing silence of flies and grief. Each step was a prayer to the Nile, to see her waters again, to feel her cool breath against our skin. I thought of my mother. I thought of the riverbank where I first learned to swim, where the reeds hid our childhood laughter. And I wondered, if I returned, would the river still know me? When we finally reached the Nile, many dropped to their knees. Some wept, some kissed the mud. I walked straight into the water until it rose to my chest, cool, heavy, alive. The current tugged at my clothes as if testing me. I cupped my hands and drank deeply, though the taste was mixed with tears and memory. We camped there for a night. The river sang softly, like a mother humming to a child too old for lullabies. But even in her song, I heard something else, a distance, a warning. The captain sat beside me, his face gaunt. He said, "When you go home, tell them the war was glorious." I asked him if he believed that. He didn't answer. When I returned to my village, it was smaller than I remembered. The huts seemed older, the river narrower. My mother's hair had turned to silver. She touched my face as if afraid I might vanish. She asked, "Are you whole?" I smiled and said yes. But part of me was still buried in the sand far to the south. I found work repairing boats and fishing nets, but my hands no longer remembered peace. At night, I woke to phantom drums. Some nights, I swore I could smell the desert again, blood, sweat, and fear. They called me a hero. I called myself a survivor. One day, in the market of Thebes, I saw a man watching me. He was tall, dark-skinned, and carried himself with quiet pride. A Nubian. Our eyes met. In that instant, the battlefield came rushing back, the drums, the dust, the cries. But the man did not move to strike. He bowed slightly, and I returned the gesture. Two enemies, bound by the same scars. Neither victorious, only human. He left without a word, and I felt something loosen in my chest, a weight I hadn't known I was carrying. Peace is a strange thing. After years of battle, silence becomes unbearable. I missed the sound of marching feet, the voice of my captain calling orders. But I also feared it, the memory of death disguised as discipline. The river still flowed, indifferent to men's wars. Children played on the banks where I once stood, chasing fish with clay spears. I wondered if they too would one day trade laughter for armor. One evening, as the sun sank into the water, I threw my cracked amulet into the Nile. The eye of Horus sank slowly, swallowed by the current. Maybe it had done its duty. Maybe I no longer needed protection. For the first time in years, I slept without dreams. Years passed like the river's tide, constant, unending. My hair grayed, my hands grew slower. I taught young men to fish, to tie knots, to live quietly. Sometimes they asked about the war. I told them it was dust and memory, nothing more. They didn't believe me, of course. No one ever does until the drums come again. And one night, when I sat by the fire, I realized the truth. I had not survived because I was strong. I had survived because I remembered . The sand forgets names, but it remembers footsteps. And so do I. When my time came, I asked to be buried by the river, not in a tomb, not beneath stone, but in the open earth. I wanted the Nile to carry my story, to wash my bones as it had washed my youth. I like to think the river remembers me, as I remember her. And perhaps, when the next war comes, a young soldier will stand by her waters, feeling her pull, and wonder, was it worth it? The answer, like the Nile, will always flow, silent, endless, alive. There was a boy who often sat by my hut near the river. His name was **KM***, my neighbor's son. He would bring me water, sometimes help mend my nets, though his eyes were always fixed beyond the horizon. One day, I asked him, "Why do you stare so far, boy?" He said, "Because I want to see what's out there." I smiled, the same words I once spoke at his age. He told me the army recruiters had come again. They promised silver, honor, and a place in the pharaoh's ranks. I felt my chest tighten, but I said nothing at first. He was young, and youth never listens to the warnings of the old. That night, I took out the few things I had kept from my soldier days, a broken arrowhead, a piece of torn linen armor, and a strip of papyrus, with names of my lost brothers. I held them in my palm and thought, maybe this time, the story would end differently. The next morning, I took Cam to the fields behind the village. I carried my old spear, the same one that had once drawn blood in Nubia. Its wooden shaft was weathered, its bronze tip dull, but it still held memory. "Hold it," I said. He gripped it awkwardly, the way all young men do when they first touch war. "A spear," I told him, "is not just for killing. It's for holding yourself steady when the world shakes." He looked confused. "Will I be brave?" he asked. I said, "Bravery is not running toward death. It's living with what follows." He nodded slowly, and for a moment, I saw myself, years ago, standing where he stood, eager to prove something to a world that cared little for proof. A year later, the drums returned. They echoed down the river like thunder chasing memory. The pharaoh called for men again, to defend Egypt's northern border this time. The markets grew quiet. The women stood by the river's edge, eyes fixed on the boats that would carry their sons away. Cam came to me in the morning light. He said, "I have to go." I wanted to stop him, to beg him to stay. But I saw the fire in his eyes, the same fire I once carried. So I gave him my old spear, polished and straightened as best I could. And I said, "When you return, tell the Nile your story." He smiled, bowed, and was gone. War takes time, not just on the field, but in the hearts that wait. Seasons passed. The floods came and went, the fish returned and vanished, and the river kept her rhythm. Every dawn, I looked across the water, hoping to see sails. But none came. Some nights, I dreamt of Cam standing beside me again, his spear shining in the sunlight. Other nights, I saw him lying still among the dunes. I would wake in silence, the same silence I had carried all my life. The women stopped asking about their sons. The priests stopped offering comfort. Even the river seemed quieter, as if she too mourned. One morning, a small boat arrived from the north. A messenger stepped ashore, young and tired, carrying a roll of papyrus sealed with the royal mark. He read aloud the names of those who would not return. When he reached Cam's name, something inside me went still. The world did not end, it simply became quieter. I took back the spear I had given him, broken now, its shaft splintered. The messenger said he fell near the delta, defending a bridge against invaders. I thanked him, though the words felt hollow. That night, I sat by the river again. The water was dark, almost black under the stars. I whispered, another name for the sand to remember. It had been decades since my first battle. Now, another generation had bled into the earth. Different men, same stories. Different kings, same thirst for power. I realized then, war is not born from hatred. It is born from the silence between people, from the belief that one side must speak louder than the other. The sand does not care who wins. It only remembers who fell. When I close my eyes, I see them all, the Nubian boy, the captain, my brothers, Cam. Their faces blur together, carried away by the same river that once promised life. On my last day, I walked to the river one final time. The morning was still, the air soft, the light like gold through thin clouds. I carried Cam's broken spear and my old amulet, the one I had once thrown away, found years later washed ashore. I tied the amulet to the spear and set it into the water. The current caught it, turning it gently before carrying it toward the horizon. I whispered, for all who came, and all who will come. And as it drifted away, I felt no sorrow, only peace. For the first time, the river and I were the same, moving, remembering, eternal. Long after I am gone, the Nile will still flow. The reeds will whisper. Children will laugh, where soldiers once fell. And the sand, the silent witness, will remember us all. Not as heroes, not as conquerors, but as men who lived, fought, and learned that even the smallest grain of sand holds a story. And perhaps, if someone listens closely, they'll hear my voice carried in the wind that sweeps across the dunes, telling them, softly, greater than, the sand remembers.